Leader of the Opposition.
Liberals have failed when it comes to making life more affordable for Canadians. Canadians are worse off today than they were 6 years ago, with out-of-control gas, grocery, rent, and housing costs. And what does this Prime Minister do? Nothing, except blame everyone else. Inflation is the fault of COVID and high gas prices. He blames Putin. That's a cop-out, Mr. Speaker. So what is this Liberal government going to do to reduce the price of things like fuel and groceries? And when are they finally going to do it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the member opposite talks about 6 years ago. One of the very first things we did when we got into office was lower taxes for the middle class, by raising them on the wealthiest 1%. We then moved forward with a Canada Child benefit that delivers hundreds of dollars a month to Canadians tax-free, while not sending checks to millionaire families like the Conservatives did before us. Mr. Speaker, we have now indexed to inflation that Canada Child benefit. So as of next month, that will raise for families across the country to help them keep up with the cost of living as we continue to invest in supports for families.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Newsflash for the Prime Minister, Canadians cannot keep up with the cost of living. They desperately need a break on these high costs. Now, while some provinces are taking action to relieve the pressure on Canadians, the Liberals are actually cheering on high gas prices and raking in the extra cash. On top of tax increases that came on April 1st, we're now seeing interest rates rise, which will cost Canadians more. But this Prime Minister continues to deny the reality. Why won't he take some responsibility and do something to reduce the cost of food, gas, and housing?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, this government has had Canadians' backs and will continue to have their backs through these difficult times. We know we're continuing to lower Canadian cell phone bills. We did that by 25% as promised. We committed to working with provinces and territories to cut childcare fees in half this year. Families are already seeing real savings as a result. We committed to raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, and it increased again on April 1st. Also, by delivering an enhanced Canada Worker benefit, more families will benefit from that support. We will continue to be there to support families across the country.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, the press lines that the Prime Minister repeats provide a minimum of information but show a lack of compassion, both for victims of violent crime and Canadians who are paying more and more for everything to satisfy his insatiable need to spend. The Prime Minister allows Canadians to pay millions more in taxes every day because everything is costing a great deal more. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to accept his responsibilities, lower taxes for Canadians, to give them a break and some time to breathe? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. It would be a little bit more credible from the Conservatives if they hadn't voted against our very first initiative to lower taxes for the middle class and increase them for the more wealthier members of society. We have continued to provide a Canada Child benefit to help families with hundreds of dollars every month, and that will increase and is indexed to inflation and the cost of living. We are here to support Canadians and individuals. So we are helping the middle class in real ways, while the Conservatives only criticize and make partisan attacks. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, what is partisan about asking this government to take some time to reflect at the difficulties that Canadian families are facing in making ends meet? It's now that Canadians need help, Mr. Speaker, not in 6 months, not in a year. It's right now that the Prime Minister should take action, but they didn't even see it coming. They had nothing in the last budget to help Canadian families get through the recession that's coming. Once again, a third increase in inflation today. What will the Prime Minister do instead of just throwing out empty words? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, concretely, because of investments that this government is making, families across the country will see thousands of dollars in lowered daycare fees in Quebec, an increase in the number of spaces because of the federal government's investments. We will continue to be there to invest and help families. The Canada Child Benefit is increasing and is tied to the cost of living. This means more money in the pockets of families that need it every month, Mr. Speaker. We are continuing to be there to support Canadians that are dealing with difficult times because of the war in Ukraine and the coming out of the pandemic.
Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen
Mr. Speaker,
Nicola.
with today's interest rate hike, more and more households will have less to pay for rising fuel and grocery costs. Other G7 countries are trying to help with skyrocketing gas prices, but this Prime Minister is making it worse. His big spending has been called inflationary by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and his carbon tax has been called inflationary by the Governor of the Bank of Canada. Conservatives have proposed a temporary cut to the GST at the pumps to help Canadians. Will the Prime Minister finally quit his worn-out talking points and finally give the middle class and those striving to join it a break?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite well knows, but will not share with his constituents or any Canadians, the price on pollution actually returns more money to the average Canadian family than it costs them in the places where it's brought in. We're talking about over $1,000 a year for families in Saskatchewan and Alberta, 800 or so in Manitoba. We will continue to make sure we are supporting Canadians even as we move beyond our reliance on fossil fuels. This is something we know the world is asking for, Canadians are asking for, and we are leading on despite Conservatives.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Inflation is always someone else's problem to solve, except this Prime Minister. And leadership, Mr. Speaker, is everything. Germany has given $16 billion break on fuel taxes. The United States has opened up a strategic reserve. This Prime Minister has asked Canadians to forgive him for not thinking about monetary policy, but inflation is hitting them hard, and we are seeing zero leadership from this Prime Minister. Conservatives aren't asking the Prime Minister to pay for his own meals, to pay for his own gas, to pay for his own housing. Will he act today and give Canadians a break at the pumps so that they can pay for theirs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know this current challenges around cost of living are hitting Canadian families hard, which is why we're continuing to step up on supports for them, whether it's supports for seniors, whether it's supports for families with increases linked to inflation of the Canada Child Benefit, whether it's moving forward on historic childcare deals that are saving Canadians, families across the country, thousands of dollars this year because of reduced costs. We are going to continue to support Canadians during this difficult time because we know they need it.
Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's goal to make everything more expensive is punishing Canadians at the grocery store. My constituency survey on inflationary grocery prices had this response from a resident. When is it going to stop? How much more do you think people can afford to spend on a set income? Another said, with the cost of food now so high, they can't afford medicine anymore. When is this Prime Minister going to wake up to how his made-in-Canada inflation is putting basic necessities out of the reach of so many people?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that global inflation caused first by the pandemic and second by Vladimir Putin's illegal war in Ukraine is putting pressures on families, including with high gas prices. Canadians deserve support, which is what we're giving, but instead, the Conservative Party has opposed policies that put money back into Canadians' pockets. They voted against cutting taxes for the middle class. They voted against cutting childcare fees in half this year, and they voted against more support for families, for seniors, for students. They're also opposing our price on pollution, which means they're opposing giving more money to 8 out of 10 Canadian families. We will be...
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly sad that the Prime Minister is so out of touch with what people are going through. But it's not only individuals, it's small businesses businesses as well. The total number of insolvencies in Canada, March 2022 compared to March 2021, was 33.1%. The Liberals' comments that business is back to pre-pandemic levels and that it's all sunny ways for everyone is false. When will the Prime Minister just acknowledge everything is more expensive, people are struggling, he blames everything on everyone else, and he really has no solutions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, during the past 2 years of the pandemic, we were there for small businesses with help in the way of CEBA loans, in the way of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, direct support for families, and we were able to continue to ensure that small businesses would be able to hold through the darkest times of this pandemic. Now, unfortunately, this pandemic continues, and with it, we see record inflation around the world. We see rise in the cost of fuel and groceries. That's why we continue to be there to support families who are squeezed by this, by investing in them, by making sure we're making the kinds of investments that support them without adding further inflationary pressures. That's what we will continue to do.